Hi, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason. I just am really not supposed to start with Nathan until 2 o'clock. So that's about 35 minutes from now. I'm sorry, about 25 minutes from now. But I'm going to go ahead and start now because I sent him the link and he might not join until 2. But I just figured I see you guys in the chat. So I thought I'd just go ahead and start this up. And I'm not doing anything else anyway. I was reading the Gospel of Mark. That's what I did this morning. And I went on a bike ride. So I've accomplished a lot. And you'll see this shirt that I have on. Nathan has a matching shirt. So yes, we both have the same shirt, and I think it's really amusing that we both have the same shirt. And I think it's because this shirt that I have here, see it's an Adidas shirt. This shirt I have is a black one. I have a red one just like it, and that's what you see in the picture. So Veckel made a very astute observation. It's the same exact shirt. And Nathan, I woke up today to find a message from Nathan in my Twitter account that had a picture of him in this particular black shirt. So we're going to match. And the reason I know these are actually men's shirts, probably I had given these shirts were actually my son's, and then they decided they didn't like them for whatever reason, and they never wore them. So I decided to take them over because I like them. I think they're perfectly great shirts. So I want to say hi to you guys in the chat. I see a few of my old friends like Susan and Veckel and Mind Onion. And Mind Onion, I was going to ask you, are you a non-belief starts with wardrobe choices? Are you an atheist? I think I asked you that yesterday, but I just wanted to find that out because I know that I think you're in Nathan's camp. I think that's where I've seen you before. And I also want to say hi to Air Church. And so I'm going to go ahead and tell you some of the things that I'm working on right now. I'm working on another book, and I'm trying to investigate a lot of the deuterocanonical books that are outside of the Bible. Some of them are considered in the Bible according to the Catholic Church, and then there's some others that are not. And so I've been reading a lot of that kind of stuff. So I've been reading Enoch and a couple of other books like that, and Baruch. And I think it's all pretty fascinating stuff because it gives you a little bit of additional insight into the minds of people who lived in ancient times. And so I think that's a good thing to do. Veckel, I know you've come in here before. I can easily give you a link if you'd like to come in here and join me and Nathan. I'm sure Nathan wouldn't mind having you. So you can let me know if you want me to do that. Oh, okay. So you identify as an agnostic atheist. Okay. Actually, then you're probably Mind Onion. You might want to listen in when I talk to Steve McRae this week, because he wants to tell me about how you cannot be an agnostic atheist. And if you know Steve McRae, he's really particular about that kind of thing. He says you cannot both be not knowing and saying that God doesn't exist, or saying you have lack of a belief in God. So it'll be interesting to see what your position is on that, and maybe to listen to him. And I'm supposed to have Steve on. Actually, we've been going back and forth on the time. Either it's going to be Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern, or it's going to be on Monday at 5 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So we're going back and forth. And as soon as I get clarity from him, we should do that. And so that's great. And I want to say hi to Jesse Camping too, and Smoky Saint and Air Church, and all you guys, good people out there. So one of the things that I thought maybe I could talk about too is ask you, people who are in the chat, what's your favorite book? Which book do you think is the most, as far as Christian books, or even if you're an atheist, as far as atheist books, which books or authors do you think have presented the strongest cases for your positions? So I'll just ask you that, see what you have to say. So I'm going to show you what I consider. So I would say C.S. Lewis. If you haven't read C.S. Lewis yet, he makes a really strong case for Christ, especially in his book Mere Christianity, which I strongly recommend. I also recommend Screwtape Letters because it's amusing. And I would also recommend The Great Divorce, because The Great Divorce is really pretty interesting. In the Great Divorce, it has basically, it has a person who falls asleep and is sort of transported into what would be considered hell. It's kind of like a gray place. And then what happens is the person has an opportunity to go to heaven. And so he gets on a bus with a bunch of other people who are in this sort of hell condition, and they go up to this place right outside of heaven. And there's like a negotiation on whether or not they should go in to heaven. And so that's the interesting bottom line. So I think what I'm going to do is, I don't see any, oh, good job with Skylar. Thank you so much. Yeah, Skylar. Yeah, so I reviewed, I just reviewed Skylar's, it was with Eric Hernandez, I think that's what we might be referring to. So I looked at Skylar's deal with Eric Hernandez, and I found that pretty interesting. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you guys some evidence that's 4 minutes long that I found for God. And if Nathan sees this, this actually might concern you guys, might scare you. So let me just bring this up. It's from Justin Brierley. If you know who he is. Whoops, I'm just trying to type his name in here. There we go. Here it is. Okay, so he's got a video. And I am going to, let me just share the screen here. Hold on. Go ahead and share that with you because I think you're going to like this. Okay, so here we go. And make sure we have sound. All right, got a little commercial here, but listen to this. This is, oh wait, does it look like it's 46 minutes? Looked like it was 4 minutes, but I'll jump to the 4 minutes.
Well, first I just thought that they were freckles. Very unattractive blob.
Who stakes his life savings on the next throw. We just got lucky in the lottery of life. Some people say there's no purpose in the universe, no grand plan, no God behind it all. Our numbers just came up and here we are. But I don't believe them, and nor should you. If I roll this dice, the chances of getting a 6 is 1 in 6. That's not too bad. But what are the chances of me rolling 6 twice in a row? Well, the odds get longer. It's 1 in 6 times by 1 in 6. That's 1 in 36. So I'd have to be pretty lucky to get 2 6s in a row. Now, every time I add the chances of rolling another 6 in a row, the odds go up exponentially, and it gets even more unlikely. Now, what if I rolled this dice 70 times, and every single time I got a 6? Okay, that's pretty unlikely, but it's possible, right? Well, in fact, the chances of rolling a 6 70 times in a row are around 1 in 10 to the 55. That's a 1 with 55 zeros after it. Now, just to put that in perspective, how long would I have to stand here rolling this dice, allowing about 5 seconds per roll, before hitting that lucky streak and rolling 76s in a row? Well, I had a mathematician friend work it out for me. On average, you would have to continually roll this dice for 100 trillion, 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 trillion years before your numbers come up. That's a long time. What if you applied that thinking to us? What are the odds of us being here? Now, the odds of rolling 76s in a row, 1 in 10 to the 55, as it happens, those are the same odds of something called the expansion rate of the universe being just right for the existence of us here today. From the moment of the Big Bang, when our universe began to rapidly expand, the rate of that expansion was exquisitely finely balanced. Any faster, and the universe would have expanded too rapidly to allow the formation of chemicals, atoms, stars, and galaxies. Any slower, and the universe would have collapsed back in on itself. But as it happens, the universe expanded at just the right rate to allow for life to develop in the future, for us to be here. It hit 70 rolls of the number 6 in a row, first time. And the expansion rate of the universe is just one among 30 or so other incredibly sensitively finely tuned constants and fundamental forces in the universe that must be just the way they are for the universe to be able to produce us. So let's imagine, if I went ahead and rolled this dice 70 times, and what do you know, every time it came up 6. No waiting for trillions upon trillions of years, first time. Beginner's luck? Hardly. You would assume that I must have rigged it. Maybe the dice are loaded, maybe there are 6s on every side. It can't be chance. Now let me ask you, why would we assume that this universe with us in it, which is actually way more improbable than my 70 rolls, is just a result of chance? The fact that we're here shows that someone's loaded the dice. In fact, maybe there's no dice at all. What if the evidence points to this life-permitting universe actually being the product of an intelligent mind which intended for us to be here? Now, you could come up with some speculative other theory. Maybe there's an infinite number of universes, giving you an infinite number of chances to roll the dice. Maybe. But we don't have any scientific evidence for it. So if you're hanging your hat on that possibility, then you're every bit as much committed to a faith position as the person who says God was behind it. Believing in God isn't a delusion. It's a perfectly reasonable conclusion when we look at the fingerprints on our universe. And if it's true that we aren't just the fluke result of a cosmic roll of the dice, and that we're actually here because a grand designer intended us from the very beginning, well, that's worth staking something on.
It's a good guy here. That's Justin Brierly. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the thing and see if Nathan has checked in yet. No, Nathan hasn't checked in yet. So, okay, so I'm going to come back to the chat. Hold on. Okay, so what do you think about that? Do you think it's pretty convincing? I must know, people. And so I see I've got a couple more people in here like Tony Designs and Karag. Yeah, one of my main purposes today is to reverse the damage that Pinecreek Doug has done, because here's what happened with Nathan. Now, Nathan would back me as I'm saying this because Nathan knows this whole story. But basically, I encountered Nathan. Nathan originally apparently was sort of agnostic, and then he went to a Christian church and he decided that he was going to be a Christian, and he made a video on him becoming a Christian. And then he aligned himself with some Christians in England where he lives. I believe he's in England, and he aligned himself with some Christians in his area, and I think they were really kind of judgmental sorts of Christians. And so they were judging Nathan's lifestyle choices and his girlfriend and telling him he had to get married, and Nathan didn't want to get married. So that particular girl, I think that's what he said. And so then he decided that, and then he went on Pinecreek Doug's channel, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, Pinecreek Doug sort of convinced him that he should be agnostics. Pinecreek Doug has these approaches that he uses that I think are a little bit off-putting. But what Pinecreek Doug does is he starts with what we call street epistemology, and he starts basically asking people these sort of probing questions. And so maybe in our spare time, what I should do is take us over to the Nathan Pinecreek Doug portion of the interview as we wait for Nathan to show up. So I will give you guys a little preview of what Pinecreek Doug does. And so let me just bring that up. So here we go. Creek Doug, Nathan Ormond. Okay, so Nathan Ormond and Pinecreek Doug. Okay, so I have had Nathan on here. Oh wait, here's the review from Nathan on his conversation with Pinecreek. Maybe we'll see what that has to be about. So let me just I'm gonna go ahead and double check that Nathan's not in the chat yet. Okay, he's not here yet, so let us Nathan know I'm doing this. Okay, so what I'm doing is we're gonna do a little bit of a review. Okay, so here we go. So you can hopefully still hear that. Okay, yeah. All right, so let's see what Nathan says about his time with Pinecreek Doug. Here we go. Pinecreek looks a little different there. This kind of looks like a portrait of Pinecreek. Okay, so here we go.
So I'm going to look at reviewing my interview with Pinecreek that I did a couple of weeks ago. To give some context for this conversation then, I basically, it had been a very long day at work and stuff. And then I'd done maybe an hour or two on Duolingo after some revision and stuff after work, and going to the gym and just eating tea. And so I wasn't in the sharpest of moods, shall we say. And then I saw this video that was suggested by this Pinecreek guy. I'd never really seen any of his stuff before. So I went into the chat, and there's loads of the typical atheist comments, you know, Jesus never existed, so I started responding to a few of these things in the comments, and then was encouraged to go on. And so I did, and was charitable I suppose in the sense that I was expecting a discussion.
Let's see if we can zoom ahead a little bit here.
I didn't realize.
Let's see what happens.
Okay, was there a specific event in your life that you think triggered you to be more depressed?
Yeah, I think a lot of it stems from adoption when I was younger, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were your adopted parents at all religious?
So that part of me wishes I'd known about street epistemology before this, because, I mean, perhaps unethical to lie, you know, certainly unethical, but I would have said, yes, they were religious fundamentalists. And the second thing I would have said is that I had a religious girlfriend that got me into it. just to highlight how stupid this whole thing is, because he would have just ran with those things and been like, oh, so this is the reason why you have these beliefs. It's not to do with any of the philosophical arguments or historical evidences or anything like that, but we can give a naturalistic explanation from psychology, or it's logically possible that this is why it happened.
That is a strategy. He's actually correct in doing that, because a lot of people, especially atheists or agnostics, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, the reason you're a Christian is because you were born in a Christian country. And William Lane Craig would say that is the genetic fallacy. How you came to a belief is not necessarily why you believe. And so I have to say, I was raised in a Catholic family. I went to the Catholic churches. I went to a Catholic grade school and freshman in high school. And then I sort of left the church. I was kind of a weak Christian for a couple of decades after that. And then I gravitated back, and I'm not in the Catholic church, but I'm in the Baptist church right now. And I really enjoy going there, and we dig into the Bible, and it's a pretty great experience. But I would recommend that anyone who's trying out these different faiths, like one of the reasons I think Nathan left the Christian faith and now decides he's an agnostic again is because I think the people he associated with were very judgmental. And I think actually there are a lot of different Christian denominations. I think that people should take care and choose the right one for you. So does it mean I'm married to the Baptist faith forever? No, actually, I can tell you, I was married in the Lutheran church. My husband considers himself a Lutheran, even though we go to this Baptist church around here. But I wouldn't be adverse if I ended up moving back to South Florida one day, if I moved back over there, to going back to that same Lutheran church that I came from, because they have contemporary services and they do dig into the Bible, and they've got some pretty interesting preachers. And so I wouldn't be adverse to that. I'm not necessarily saying you have to stick with the same sect your entire life if the circumstances provide you in a different angle, and there's maybe really good pastors in these other denominations. And so I can see that possibility happening. Or if we move where I want to move after my kids get out of high school, from this neighborhood, because we're pretty much married to the schools here. But after my kids get out of high school, we might move over by St. Pete Beach, and so there might be a different denomination of a church there that I really enjoy. So that is a possibility too. So while I'm going to go back to Nathan here and see what else he says.
And try and induce epistemic doubt that way. Epistemology, for those who don't know, means how we know what we know, like your theory of knowledge. So, for example, if I say birds are eagles, it might be, I can say I know that eagles are birds. I know that eagles are birds. And someone might say, well, that's a justified true belief. And then someone might give an example where you have a justified true belief, but it doesn't really constitute knowledge. So we've got to dig a bit deeper into how we can really say that we have propositional knowledge in that sense.
No, not at all.
Okay. And so a year and a half ago, for some reason, the whole idea of adoption really hit you, impacted you?
Oh no, not a year and a half ago. I think throughout my entire life, really, and then dealing with that in various different ways.
Gotcha.
And then I think in the UK we do like A levels when we graduate from high school. It was around that time that it really hit me. So I didn't study as I should have. I wasn't sure where I was going to go to uni, and I messed up my life at that point. And I actually
how did you mess up your life?
A lot of my identity was put into like playing rugby, which kind of like America. Are you American or Canadian? Sorry.
I'm Canadian.
Okay.
So I know what rugby is.
Yeah, you're going to be more familiar with that. So I blew out an ACL in my knee when I was playing rugby.
I've done that.
And then while I was waiting for the surgery for that, I ended up taking a load of like mushrooms and stuff. And this was me seeking some truth, trying to figure out what the world's all about and inquire into why I felt the way I did. And when I did that, I ended up meeting my mum for the first time, biological mum.
Oh,
when
wow.
I did, her boyfriend did Muay Thai. He sparred with me for the first time, snapped the ACL in my other knee.
Oh!
So I had 2 snapped ACLs then, and I was I was looking at my kind of final year of A levels with 2 snapped ACLs and incredibly depressed, not knowing where my life was going, etc.
Nathan's in the house.
Then I had the surgeries. I obviously finished high school and I was working.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Hey, Nathan.
Yes, Jay. How are you doing? You right?
I'm going to go ahead, and I was just sharing how you, and I was just sharing highlights from your interview here with Doug. So I thought that that would be a nice way to start our meeting. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing this for a second here so I can get you on. So everybody can see that Nathan and I have matching shirts.
Yeah, that's a good shirt.
Isn't that hilarious? It's like, I wear my kids' shirts all the time because they're at this perfect size where they're growing out of their shirt. This shirt they didn't grow out of. This one they just, for some reason, they wouldn't wear it. And so I just took them over. But there are other shirts that they grew out of and I start just taking them over. So I've got all kinds of Guy Harvey shirts, like really, really good shirts. So yeah, I figured why not, right? All right, so I'm going to go, let me go so I can see the chat here. And
yeah, sure. I'm
going to go ahead and get out of this. I was just showing your video and whoops. What did I do? I'm trying to get out of this thing. Wait, okay, there we go. Now I can get back over to the chat.
Got a few people in the chat. Brent.
Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on. And how many of you guys in the chat have ever seen two people interviewing that happen to have the exact same shirt on? Do you think we pre-planned this? What are the odds? Nathan and I would have the same shirt. So I think it's funny. So actually, Nathan, I was listening to a little bit of what you were saying with Pinecreek, and I had heard some of that before, and I'm just wondering, are you still in the agnostic camp?
I mean, I'm trying to be a liberal Christian. I'm trying my hand at that, see how that goes. But on knowledge claims, yeah, I'm agnostic. Like I don't know God exists or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. This is Brent. Yes, I am pleased that we're on the same team as far as our black and white shirts here. They're actually both the same brand. Even these are both Adidas shirts. So we're both.
Is your red one Adidas as well?
Yeah, my red one's Adidas too.
So's mine.
I bought them together. I bought them at Costco. That's where I got them. Where'd you get yours?
I think I got mine off Amazon. So.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was at Costco, and Costco's like this big discount warehouse sort of retailer, and so I was in there and I spotted the shirts and I thought my sons would like them, and they didn't wear them, so I thought, well, forget that, I'll just take them over. I love these shirts. It's great. Super comfy, and comfort's a key in these days with all the stuff going around. So you've moved away from purely agnostic. So you consider yourself I think it's a good thing to be a liberal Christian. Do you go to church at all?
Yeah, but I mean, I've been going to church throughout the whole process, really. I mean, I've been going less regularly and exploring other churches and things like that as well, because, there's more than just what I initially started going to out there. There's a lot of different kind of theological views, a lot of different ways of doing worship and liturgy and stuff. And so I think I enjoy like high church more, I've kind of found out.
High church? What do you mean by high church? Is that like the Church of England? Yeah,
high church would be like more sort of like Catholic liturgy. So, it's more traditional. That might be a good way of putting it. Or smells and bells sort of thing, rather than the kind of evangelical focus on just preaching, say, like that. That's quite more reformed tradition.
Yeah. No, that's actually really interesting, because that's the opposite trail that I took. And my sister is still in the Catholic Church. She loves the orthodoxy of it. She loves the sacraments, and she gave up meat for Lent. She did that, which was pretty impressive, actually. And she likes that idea of the hymns and the liturgy and that. And so I'm the opposite. I kind of really felt something when I feel something every time I go to church, but I really felt something special when we were singing those contemporary songs in this Baptist church. And so I love the idea of digging into the Bible and that. And in the Baptist church, they spend about 40 minutes digging into the Bible. And the Catholic churches I used to go to only spend about 10 to 15 minutes reading a passage and sometimes sharing it. But that wasn't the same. In the Lutheran church, though, I just mentioned this before you came on. In the Lutheran church that I was going to on the other coast, where my mother-in-law still attends, she rings the bells, and they have the traditional service with the bells and the hymns, and then they have the contemporary service where they have the contemporary music. And so, when we went there for Christmas, actually, we went to the contemporary service, and I actually really enjoyed that. So,
yeah, I just found, I mean, if Christianity were true in the way that Reformed people think it's true, then I'd get the emphasis on preaching and stuff like that. But I just found that emphasis on preaching in that way, when you don't think what's being said is true or even necessary in that way, like it's difficult to continue to participate in when when if religion becomes more about the experience of God, or if even if there isn't a God there, the kind of it becomes more about serving in the community and stuff than it does about having the right beliefs and attitudes and stuff, which is what that all seems to be centered around. So
Yeah, no, I think that you're doing all the right stuff. I mean, I like the idea that you're going to the church and you have a particular kind of church that you're enjoying. And so, I don't, that's great. When I was your age, and I think you're in your 20s, right? Are you in your 20s?
Yeah, 23.
Yeah. When I was your age, that was about the age that I kind of walked away from the Catholic Church, and I was waffling around for a while. So it's, I mean, you never know when you never know. I mean, you could spend years in your position or you could change, and all of a sudden you become like a diehard, really strong Christian. But for 20 years, I was thinking to myself that the Eastern faiths were superior. I was thinking, I loved the Buddhist faith, and I would read all these crazy books by James Redfield and Wayne Dyer and all these other people who basically say that all religions are equally valid, and the Eastern faiths to some extent are superior. And so I was thinking that way, and I read the Dalai Lama. And so have you looked at other faiths, or are you pretty much just sort of looking at Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of other faiths, and I'd say I'm like a pluralist when it comes to religion. So I think if there's any truth to any of them, it would be kind of various cultures' attempts at getting at that truth in their own kind of unique ways and stuff. So yeah, I wouldn't be necessarily like an exclusivist, at least at the minute, if I were to look at. So I find stuff like some of the stuff in Hinduism really interesting, some of the stuff in Buddhism. I find like Islam can be really cool in a lot of ways. But I think for me, just because I was, as the atheist would love to say, because I was born in a Christian country, that's the one that resonates with me the most, and the one that culturally and historically is sort of interwoven with my identity in a way that I just can't relate to any of the others, because I don't have that cultural upbringing or history. So.
Yeah. That's what I used to think. I used to think and I see here, Brian Stevens says, did I ever think Christianity was actually false? No, I actually didn't go through the home. I mean, I didn't do my homework, really. I never really studied the Bible. I never really looked into it. And I didn't even have a full Bible in my house when I had started having these spiritual experiences. So, but what happened was, I wasn't even sure Jesus resurrected. I was sort of in this camp where I was waffling about, not sure, and didn't even take any time to look into it, because I figured, hey, I was raised in that faith. That's the default. It's kind of boring. Let me check out these really exotic Eastern faiths. And so and I thought some aspects of Buddhism, and I would try to get into the real spiritual stuff. I thought it was really interesting. I was never an atheist, though. I can say that. And I would never say I was agnostic, because I always felt like there's something better than ourselves out there. I always felt like a presence of some deeper truth.
Yeah, I think if atheism is the affirmation that there are no gods, I don't think I could ever adopt that position. At most, I think I could say agnostic. I guess, though some people do obviously legitimately identify that way. Like I don't think they're just identifying that way, because they just hate God or something. Like, so some people in Reformed traditions might kind of say that that's what's going on. But for me, like I could only ever see myself just either sincerely not being sure, or I think now, if I'm being honest with myself, I'll probably always never be sure, because I don't think I've ever been sure in the past. And I think when I was in Christianity, it was more the group pressure that led me to adopting the same beliefs as everyone else. When I was like I was aware of, say, like in the early church fathers and stuff, the diversity of opinions that there were philosophically and theologically around Christianity, from like Gnosticism to what's become like orthodoxy now, to various kind of views. And I was like, well, within that diversity, I don't know where I stand. I don't think I stand exactly where a lot of these people do, but I think just over successive like group meetings and stuff. So say like you'd read Genesis, and I'd be like, oh, it's really cool how this bit draws on the Epic of Gilgamesh or whatever. And that to me added a load of depth. Whereas it was like, no, we can't think that way. Like, that isn't the right way of thinking about the Bible, because it has to be this divine, special, simple message that says, and so I was like, oh, I guess I can't think like that anymore. And because of the social, because of like everyone else was thinking that way, I was like, oh, I'll just stop thinking that way about the Bible, or stop thinking that way about Christianity. But I think that was why, not because I thought necessarily what people were saying was true, but because of the social pressure of it. Whereas initially what drew me to Christianity was seeing this long historical process of people trying to understand the divine and the ultimate, and coming at it in different ways through their own cultures. And then I was like, well, this is just the one that this is how our culture has worked it out to this point, is what Christianity is. So yeah, I think there's a lot more depth to the Bible when it's looked at that way as well. Like a lot more, like if the Bible is this kind of diverse book where we've got all these different cultural, historical lenses and things of people trying to understand God, then there's so much more than if we just want to parse it into the concepts that we use and understand, and that makes sense to us. But yeah, sorry, I don't know if that...
Yeah, no, I agree. Have you read Tom Holland's Dominion, his book Dominion?
I've not yet, no.
You would love that book. And he's writing from, he's coming from, I think he's from the UK too. I think he's coming from your neck of the woods. So I think that might be interesting, because he really digs into history of Christianity. And he actually told somebody, I'm not allowed to name, but he told somebody that actually now he's a Christian. And after looking at the history of Christian and kind of going at it from the angle that you are, there's another person who came to Christianity in that sort of a similar kind of what you're saying way, is Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens' brother.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Rage Against God. And so I read his book to read his story. And he and his brother, Christopher, both left Christianity. They were raised in a Christian house, and they both left Christianity, became atheists. And then he said it was like this freedom. He could do whatever he wanted to do. He had no rules, and he was just going around doing some really awful things. And not everybody acts like that, but he apparently did. And then he went into this church. I think he was in a church, but he saw this beautiful drawing of basically hell. It was like in the Inferno or something like that. It wasn't that exact drawing. I forgot what it was, but he saw this drawing, and it just sort of jiggled his mind a little bit. And he decided he didn't want to end up there. So that's how he came to Christianity. But I think what I'm trying to say though, is I think sometimes it's the art and the churches and the history. I think that is a pretty strong seller for Christianity. Like you're saying, I think that's kind of related.
Yeah,
to what
I'm saying like, because I don't know if we can know either. I mean, maybe you'd probably disagree, but about a lot of the metaphysical propositions, and I think where the reformers and people who are in that kind of reformed tradition go wrong is it's so centered around having to just like have the right attitudes about things, when that's so recent as an idea in Christianity, and there's very little attention given to what, like, say, the church fathers believed, or what like medieval writers had to say about things, because it's all about, Martin Luther, John Calvin, Zwingli, whatever, like they got it right, like that, and that's it. Like their understanding and it's like, well, maybe their understanding was something different, and now again we have a different understanding, just like people writing in the times of Isaiah had a different understanding to people kind of compiling the books in the Pentateuch and stuff, and so yeah,
I agree with you. I think we should go back into history and look at like St. Augustine and some of the early church fathers.
Yeah, I just think I think now, the way that it's put across, and this is where I can really deeply resonate with people who go over to atheism, is because they look at what's being sold by like this American style evangelical Christianity, and it's like frankly it is in tension with science and things to do with, say, like evolution or the age of the earth, geology, the sciences, and they're like, well, I've been sold a lie on this one. And then they see people like say Kenneth Copeland, with his kind of blow coronavirus away, or they see people rejecting like medical treatment and stuff because of like religious attitudes, and they go, well, that's dangerous, that's bad, I don't want any part to do with that, because it's about having the right beliefs. But then some people, the right beliefs is like when the like literally means is like if the Bible, if you're like some weird little verse somewhere that says something really fringe, and they're like, yeah, that literally means like don't go and get healthcare from your doctor or something for some Christians. And I think rightfully a lot of atheists kind of react against that and go, oh no, it's so wacky. And then there's a slightly different version of that within the Catholic tradition, which I think is where people have been like really had really like damaging upbringing in like Catholic schools and things, like the strictness, or the, maybe for a lot of people, like the sexual ethics and guilt and stuff like that, and so they want nothing to do with it. And I think people just get hurt by a lot of the ways that people do Christianity, and it causes them to react against it and not want to think about, even if you were to accept atheism. I think religion plays a role in life. And if there is no God, and we're just we're just here for whatever reasons, who knows, we could say kind of, we could look at what we do know from the sciences and say, well, we're social apes, and we create these rules and systems and things. And so it would be, you'd expect on that hypothesis for people to come up with religion and to mythologize their highest truths and things like that. And so I think even what atheists should do is think, well, actually, and I know, again, I know you'd disagree, because you'd say it is tethered to truth, but I've got a friend who said once, like what a lot of philosophers were saying 100 years ago is like, well, everyone knows religion's bullshit, but the question is, why is it there? Why is it? I know you disagree, but why does it still exist in society? Obviously, it's got some kind of purpose, or some. There's more to it than just those correct beliefs and attitudes. So focusing on that is like the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Actually, I think it's sort of a to me it seems, and I'm going to be blunt here. I think it seems prideful and throwing the baby out with the bathwater to basically say, I'm going to reject God altogether because I don't like the people who raised me, or the people who influenced me coming from these different churches. So I know that atheists are going to not like that I said that, but I feel like it's taking things too far. And I think a better move would be to say, hey, maybe the YEC, maybe I shouldn't be a young earth creationist. Maybe I should actually look at the old earth people, or the people who believe in evolution, like Sygart, those kind of people. Maybe I should do that kind of stuff rather than just throw this whole thing away. But I can see it also might be from anger, and it could be from abuse. I mean, I've been people who've been abused by the church. The Catholic Church is definitely guilty of that. And that's actually one of the reasons I left the Catholic Church, is because I was very frustrated with the Pope not doing enough about this, with the boys and that kind of thing, the altar boys. It is just, he still hasn't done enough with that. I've still had problems in the Catholic Church.
Do you not think though, like, if you were, what you know of like Christ and his attitude, right? If he is looking at that situation where someone has been hurt in that way, and they're angry at the church and don't want anything to do with it, like, do you think he'd genuinely look at that situation and be like, oh, that's the wrong thing to do? Or do you think he'd actually be like, that's, that I understand, and that's the right thing for this person? Like, I think that, because I think a being whose goodness itself, whose highest ideals are all to do with love and so forth, and has infinite knowledge, wouldn't look at that situation and be kind of going, oh no, you've got to, what it's about is believing the right thing about me. I think they'd be able to take into account the nuance of that situation and everything going on, and really see, I think they'd see that person who's rejecting it as actually that's the right thing for them, because that's more important than them having the correct, theological attitudes or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think Christ, in the number one thing to remember is atheism has a 30% retention rate. So there's a lot of people who become atheists and who end up leaving the faith. And so, I think that there could be people lashing out at some point in their lives, and maybe the lashing out lasts for decades. Maybe they want to get away from these awful people they were raised by, or they want to get away from the people in this church that were very maybe abusive or hostile towards them. I mean, I look at a girl like there's this person on Twitter called Jen with one N, and she was somebody who I want to say she got pregnant, and they told her that they sort of scorned her because she got pregnant out of wedlock, and so they. she felt like they kind of abused her and that kind of thing. And then she decided she was just going to, get rid of God altogether because she felt like she had called on him and he didn't answer. And so I feel like those kind of people, God lets them take these paths, and maybe the paths even last for a few decades. And then at some point they might say, I really do want to know what's the truth. And if they get on their knees and ask God, God will let them know. God will inform. So that's and have you had, Nathan, when you say you've had any, you said, like you might say you're agnostic at one point, or you might have said you were agnostic at one point, but have you felt like you've had any spiritual experiences that would say that, hey, I can't just take this atheism thing up?
All of the experiences I've had also have a naturalistic explanation, which makes sense, so fundamentally, I have the experiences, so I have to deal with them. But at the same time, I also have, the naturalist explanations are there, and I can't just ignore that and go, well, this is really, really, really special to me, so I'm gonna ignore the fact that it could have just been, like a couple of those occasions are on psychedelic drugs, and that's really common that people have those experiences on psychedelic drugs. I wouldn't necessarily use them as evidence. I'd say they certainly have changed my attitudes towards the world, but it would 100% make sense if that was just my if God didn't exist. And I don't think the mind is reducible to matter, but it could be, and it could just be that when the matter is working in a different way, that you have that kind of experience. I don't know. It's possible.
Yeah, I see Brian Stevens. I want to say thank you for your super chat. He said, I asked on my knees, why has God not answered? And I can tell you, Brian, for my own experience, it took me a long time before I felt like I got an answer. So, it took me 20 years of asking for the truth. I always wanted to know the truth. All of us want that. I think all of us truly want to know, what is the truth of this life? What is this all about? And, I'd be reading these books by the Dalai Lama, and these people thinking they had the truth. And I just didn't look into the stuff behind Jesus's resurrection. Once I started looking at that, I realized that this is a big deal. This is true. But I can tell you, here's some experiences that I've had, because I just want to share that I think go beyond the natural. Actually, first I'll give you two things that my sister had happen to her when she was little, and we were in Florida on vacation. She got caught in a rip current, and she was out there sort of in the ocean alone in this area. And she heard a woman's voice very clearly say, don't swim against it, just go with it. And so she did. And then she was saved, essentially. And she, man, thank you. It says, you can text God by faith. It's simple. So yeah, by faith is very important. But the other experience that I had, oh, that's her. And then she had another experience. She was sitting at a desk in this business that we used to work in, and there was a cross on the desk, and she just prayed to God, and she said, God, just please give me a sign. I need to know, is Christianity the truth? And the cross moved across the desk without, there was nothing to move the cross. So that's what she's had. And she's she doesn't get on YouTube. She's not doing anything to promote her faith. She's definitely a stout or a strong Catholic, but she's not like I am. She's not doing anything like this. And I don't see any reason why she'd lie. But then I had one experience that sometimes you get these feelings like deja vu. And I feel like there's something to those, because I had one time I was sitting in an accounting class at Florida Atlantic University, and this girl used to sit 2 rows ahead of me, and I noticed her in my class. And then I had a dream she was going to be my roommate up at Florida State. Now, I had never even talked to her before. And the next class I'm walking out with her, I walked behind her, and she kind of struck up a conversation, and we found out she's transferring to Florida State. And this was my sophomore semester. And I said, I am too. The next thing you know, we're roommates up at Florida State. Now, I know that's sort of self-fulfilling, but these little weird things, I've had it happen quite a few times in my life. And I feel like how does that, to me, there's no natural explanation for that, except, this hunch that she happened to be transferring to, which I don't even know how.
So I think what that's called, though, is like a pareidolia or something, or patternicity. Some people, it's like, and I think we do definitely do this as people, where there are things which happen and we're trying to find patterns in them, and the patterns aren't necessarily there. Like there's a correlation between deaths by drowning in pools and Nicolas Cage movies, right? but there's no causation between Nicolas Cage movies and people drowning in pools. It's just that you know, like if you put the numbers next to each other, then they correlate in that way. And I think that to some extent that's something that we can do. So I think like these experiences could be true, but I don't think they're the type of thing that we could necessarily falsify or prove. And I do think it's more.
You're right.
And I think with a lot of them, it's more probably true that not that the person is lying, but that the person has developed a false belief for some reason, which you know, like if you just heard any of these stories and they weren't like someone you personally knew, like, you know, 99 times out of 100, probably more, you'd think that there was some kind of natural explanation for it, but then the person developed a false belief because and maybe even, like, this is the thing about like epistemology, maybe the false belief could even be true just by luck, but that kind of method of justification is wrong in some sense. So
Yeah.
I'm skeptical.
Well, I know, you see, I don't blame him. Everyone's going to be skeptical for sure of my sister's story. And you guys don't even know my sister. She's never been on YouTube and actually has no desire to ever go on YouTube. I've talked to her about it, tried to get her on. But so you have no reason to believe that story. But as far as my story with the roommate, I did share that with my family before I was walking down the thing with Babs. So I let them know. I said, yeah, I had this weird dream that this girl in my accounting class is going to be with me at Florida State. We'll be roommates. And they thought that was funny. And then it turns out she ended up being my best friend. She was a great influence on me. And she was a very strong Catholic herself, but a tremendous influence, because I had a tendency to like to go off on the wild side a little bit. And she definitely kept me, you know, much more grounded than I might have been if I didn't have her. So she was actually a blessing in disguise.
So here's a good story right about me. So when I was 18 or something, and I had smoked a load of weed, and I was really like having a weird sort of experience. And I heard this noise in the other room, and my brother was about to move into a house that was like a building site, and I was living there at the time. So I thought, I built this story up in my head of what happened. So he'd given the keys to the builder. The builder had gone down to the pub, and in the pub, the builder had sold the keys to some burglars, to whoever was the highest bidder. And the burglars were coming to the house, to rob all the stuff. And I was convinced that this was what was happening, even to the point that I called someone that was really close to me, and I said, look, I'm going to go and confront the burglars now, but I promise I'll look them in the eye before they kill me, right? I walk into the other room, and it's a radiator gurgling. So I developed, over the course of an hour or so, all of these false beliefs, all of these inferences about what was going on. I was convinced of it, and I was, you know, my heart rate was really high, thinking what was going on. And it's a radiator gurgling in the other room. And now, you know, you could obviously we'd attribute the reason that happened to the effects of THC and CBD on my brain, rather than that the Satan led me astray, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to be really careful with a lot of these cases. I think it's just more likely that there's some sort of, you know, like, who knows what it is, but even if it is true by luck, there's probably a natural explanation sitting behind it, just probabilistically looking at things.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, even going back, I see Brian Stevens, he just another super chat. I want to say thank you, Brian. Have I had dreams that didn't come true? It's funny with dreams, because that particular dream, I felt like that was the truth, but I don't wake up from all dreams saying there's something special about this dream. And a lot of dreams I have, and I forget them, but I have had some eye-opening dreams. I've had some very eye-opening dreams, and I'll just give you one of them that was kind of recent. It's kind of creepy. So and this maybe has to do with Twitter. So I had this dream that I was I had this dream that I was running down this road with this little old lady who lives in my neighborhood, who's like 96 years old, and she's Jewish. And she's right now, she has a very difficult or hard time walking. She's really, really old and frail. But in the dream, we were running, and then she started to fly. I mean, this sounds crazy. I know you're going to think this. She started to fly. Here's one that didn't come true, Brian. And I started to fly right next to her. And we flew up into like the sky. And the next thing you know, we were in this beautiful library with the most amazing mahogany library I've ever seen that was full of all these amazing books. And I was thinking to myself, this is heaven. This is, to me, that's as good as it gets. And then suddenly I'm out of the library and I'm down on this road and I'm being chased by a bunch of like demon people chasing me, and they're throwing these anvils at me and they're yelling the word anvil. And I, you know, I'm throwing these like spear things at me and yelling the word anvils. And I wake up and I'm like, anvils? Where have I even seen an anvil? And so I thought of Bugs Bunny, and I thought of that, like the silly little anvil on Bugs Bunny, but it didn't look like that, these spear things that they threw at me. So I go online and I look up the word anvil, and I see that they're these ancient tools, and the tools look just like what they were throwing at me in my dream, which was kind of freaky. And so I get these weird, like those kind of dreams. And I feel like there's some sort of underlying truth. And if I say it doesn't come true, but and it could be out of my brain constructing something like this based on Twitter interactions with people who are quite hostile towards me.
What kind of truth would you, because like if we look at, say, some of the psychology and science right behind what's going on in dreams, we know that some of the things that we do in dreams is like try and prepare ourselves for stressful situations. So like if I've got this really big meeting at work coming up and I have dreams about things happening and it going wrong and stuff, I mean, what the literature says about that is basically I'm aware that this is something that's important for me and it could go wrong, and I'm aware of the facts that are involved. So if then that kind of comes true in some sense, like it's likely that that's just what's going on there. But like in what, you know, like with that one where it's pretty, you know, like all the stuff going on is pretty kind of crazy out there, what would you say is like true behind that?
I think that I think it was symbolic in a way. It was symbolic of some of the people I've encountered on places like on Twitter, where I've got a lot of people who really don't like me. I've got over 600 people I've blocked on Twitter because I don't need to interact with people like that. And so, I think that there is an underlying source of some of their hostility. That's a dark, very dark source of some of their hostility. And I don't think you're like that. I think that you're not at all like that. I think you handle yourself very well, and you're very professional in how you speak and things like that. But there are some people I think have this underlying current of darkness that's I can call it.
So if we say, like, can you see how on a naturalist kind of account of things, it would look at that situation and say, so someone who is a Christian who views the world in this way, in terms of like demonic forces and heavenly forces kind of battling it out, then when they're engaging in apologetics and stuff and they're getting pushback from people, that they dream about that's what's going on. Like, wouldn't you expect, say, someone who's a Hindu or something to have like similar dreams, but with their kind of cultural motifs involved, and what's going on? Or someone who's a Muslim to have similar dreams of their cultural motifs, whatever. I think a naturalist would just look at that and say, yeah, that makes perfect sense, without necessarily having to invoke God at all to answer that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the naturalism, I want to get into naturalism in just 1 second. Brent Killar says, what is the damage done by Pinecreek, Doug? Well, I just kind of had a funny title on this video, but it was, what happened was Nathan was saying he was a Christian, and then he went on to Pinecreek's channel, and then he was saying he was an agnostic, but it looks like Pinecreek, some of this has already been undone apparently, because now you're saying that you're kind of a liberal Christian. And so Pinecreek,
yeah, but I mean, I'd say, you know, like, and you've got G-Man in the chat and Hill. So I'm identifying as a liberal Christian, right? But I don't think the resurrection happened, for example. And I know you disagree with that. G-Man would, and I wouldn't be surprised if both of you say that precludes me from Christianity. And I don't really know that God exists either.
See, I was like you. I understand your position completely, because I was thinking like that for a long time, that I wasn't sure about the resurrection for, gosh, like 20 years. I wasn't sure. I just, you know, we did all the motions, but I never looked into the facts around it. And so, but you know, the thing about naturalism, did you see the debate between Eric Hernandez and Skylar Fiction?
No, but I think well, I've not seen the whole thing. I've seen like 10 minutes of it, but I do think that let's say if it hadn't been Schuyler fiction, it had been Patricia Churchland, then it would have got, like, I don't think Schuyler engages with the philosophy of mind, but literature, basically, I don't think, and that's just not what he does. And if it had been T-Jump, say, I think it would have been quite different.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen the debate, but I guess T-Jump has debated Eric Hernandez before.
I don't know on philosophy of mind, though, that I've seen.
Oh, I actually don't know what he debated on. That's a good question. I just know they have debated on something. So, but the thing is, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because Eric Hernandez, he's a very high level, it seems like very high level knowledge in philosophy. And he talks a lot about things like consciousness and how we explain consciousness with just a naturalistic type of view. And he looks at this idea of if everything's reduced to naturalism, then, for example, nothing has a greater meaning. And so you could look at like a menu and say that even though you've got food items that are symbolic of something, the naturalist position is the menu is reducible just to paper. And so there's meaning in words, and there's a lot of context, and I'd say spirituality that aren't explained with a purely naturalist position. And
so I actually 100% agree that for certain, so where a lot of atheists come from, right, which is like the mind is just the brain, is like a fundamental misunderstanding of the philosophy of mind literature out there, because the question isn't do our mental states correlate to brain states, like that, like even like dualists like Ed Feser and stuff, they agree on that. They agree that there's a correlation there. The question is, how do we get things like semantics and stuff? But the thing that I think what Eric Hernandez is addressing there is more the pop atheism and stuff, but there's people out there like David Chalmers, say, or John Searle, right? John Searle, who came up with the very thought experiment, the Chinese room thought experiment, which is how do we get semantic meaning from syntax? He isn't, he's a naturalist. David Chalmers is there are solutions. I'm not saying that they're necessarily sufficient, but I think to present it as if it's like just 100% conclusive, needs theism or whatever, I don't think that that's the state of play. Like I think the only one we could say is absolutely wrong is the very simplistic. But even then, like I say, someone like Patricia Churchland could debate me and destroy all my points. But what I'm trying to say is like there's so much out there. The only option isn't just theism and a soul. Like there's a lot of various things that mind could be before, without it being like theism, theistic dualism.
I want to say before we go on, I want to say hi to Duncan Atheism asked a kind of funny question about red lipstick. I thought I put lipstick on, but maybe it's not showing. So sorry about that. No, I know Duncan. I know you, Darth Dawkins. I've had conversations with you, and I've listened to you in some debates. So it's all good stuff. Brian Stevens, Tim.
Is Duncan Atheism Darth Dawkins?
Darth Dawkins. Yeah, you remember him?
Oh wow. I loved his discussion with Alex Malpass. I think he did a great job.
Oh, really? I have to listen to it. I didn't see the discussion. I see Alex Malpass on your channel?
Yeah, he came in the chat, and I've talked to him a bit. He did, his paper on the Kalam cosmological argument. I had some questions about that, so he answered some of them for me, but not on YouTube, just
oh, interesting. Yeah, because I knew I'd seen his name before, and I got in your chat, and I'm like, where have I seen this guy's name? And it could have been with that debate, or it could have been, I think he said he debated, who else did he debate? William Lane Craig? Is that who he said?
Yeah, he did, like a month ago or something.
Yeah. I'm kind of afraid to invite, Darth, I can have another conversation with you another time, but I'm kind of afraid to get more people on here just today, because I want to make sure that Nathan and I are able to sort of hammer some things out, and Nathan decides that Jesus resurrected by the end of this call. Sorry, Nathan, I just told you my secret. So, but I think it might be better just to not have more people in the conversation right now than just the two of us, especially because unless you guys have a black shirt with white stripes on it, because we're matching. I don't know if you noticed that. They don't see that. Oh, wait. Okay, so another thing I wanted to say. So yeah, I think you're right. The idea of, I think just the human experience a lot does speak to me, it speaks to theism. And I would say the reason I think it speaks to theism is basically because we are meaning and purpose seeking creatures. And that's a commonality across humans. And I think that this experience of beauty and music and art and all that kind of stuff that makes humans exceptional is pretty important. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can distinguish ourselves from the animal part of the planet. So from animals, I think humans are meaning-seeking purpose beings because we have a purpose giver. So that's my bottom line. And I think you do support the idea that we're meaning and purpose seeking. I think you yourself, I'm sure, are purpose and meaning seeking, right?
Yeah, I agree, which is why I'm participating in religion. But I'd say, I'd say that that makes sense on naturalism though as well, which is why I don't think, when a lot of atheists, I understand when it affects things, like when there's like Westboro Baptist types out there, right? I understand why atheists would say, well, this is bad religion. But I think by and large, what atheists would expect on that hypothesis is that people would form religions to, because we are meaning purpose seeking. It's just that on their view, it's not tethered to anything. It's not tethered to some transcendent realm of the good, the beautiful, and the true sort of thing. It's just a bottom up kind of thing.
Yeah, see, that's where I would say, here's what I would say. I would say the fact that we seek to be we're reasoning beings, we seek logic, we seek meaning, purpose. A lot of that kind of stuff, I would make an argument, is not explained in just the evolutionary processes that got us here. So I would make some pretty strong arguments that because we have this consciousness, this awareness, this innate desire to be benevolent and to help other people, even in our outgroups. I think when we have all that kind of stuff and we have these desires to do things like forgive people, and it actually is better for us health-wise when we forgive people. I think these kinds of things speak to a life-giving source that is highly moral and has implanted in us a conscience. And so I would say that the conscience also could make another argument that God is out there as a moral lawgiver.
Oh, but I think, why would you say that on naturalism you wouldn't expect to see those sorts of things? And so ignoring, I think there is a problem for naturalism about how you would perhaps get like DNA or a nucleotide in the first place. But let's say if we just grant that on naturalism, and you've got organisms evolving by natural selection, which I assume some form of which you hold to, maybe like theistic evolution of some sort. But why would those organisms not develop those things? Like, aren't there certain conditions which would select for that?
Yeah, let me speak to that. So first thing, I like that you brought up the DNA, because the DNA presents a very big problem for people who are atheists, because DNA essentially is 3.5 billion well-ordered, what they call letters, basically. And so acids. So it's 3.5. So to say that wasn't inspired by a divine source is basically saying that the Bible, a book with a bunch of letters put together, isn't inspired or written by 40 different authors. So it's basically saying that there's no author of this DNA code and no coder. And I don't think that logically makes sense. But this other idea that you're bringing up is talking about our evolutionary processes. Now, the thing that people don't want to recognize on the evolution idea is like what the Royal Society decided were big problems with the evolutionary theories, because they can't explain a lot of the lack of transitional fossils that came about during the Cambrian explosion. There's a serious lack of transitional fossils between a lot of the different species that are out there. And so there's some other things going on that the Royal Society pointed out in 2016 were very problematic, and they called on a new theory. I'm okay with evolution. I would say that if we did come to life based on, if we evolved from primordial soup, that certainly speaks to a guider, I would say at the very least, who got us here with intention. And so I feel like if you look outside, and I know it sounds simplistic and people hate when I say this, but I feel like if I look outside, I just look at the trees, I have evidence of God. Or if I look at the skyline, I have evidence, or the mountains, or just all the beauty out there. And the fact that I can apprehend beauty in the way I do, and I can apprehend art and abstract concepts, speaks to human exceptionalism, and it speaks to guided design. I mean, I can't, even if you looked at, if you look at Hugh Ross's book called Improbable Planet, I don't know if, have you read any of Hugh Ross's books?
I've not. No.
He's got what Hugh Ross does is he maps out how the earth came to be on this planet. And just like the Bible sort of described, in the very beginning, the earth was just cloud covered, completely covered, and it was desolate. And it maybe looked like some other planets that are out there right now, but then suddenly there's like, suddenly you start to see plants and animals and all this kind of stuff. And it just, to me, speaks to, I mean, I look outside and I feel like it would be crazy for me to try to posit that a tree that might have come from a little teeny seed, that this all wasn't planned out by a moral and higher power, a higher creator power. So, I mean, just look at, how does a seed know that it should turn into a tree? Or how does a sunflower seed, how did it come about that suddenly grows into a sunflower? I feel like that all of this stuff in the Bible explains that for us. It says the creator did that, so.
I think in that explanation, the way that like an atheist would respond first to, so saying the comparison of a book to DNA, I think in a lot of respects they probably reject that, because like the ATGC kind of pairing of bases that would, it's a chemical thing, right? When we give it the symbol A, T, C, and G, then we grant it semantics as well. But actually in the physical world, the semantics don't exist. And I'd say you can't have it both ways, because that's part of the argument for why mind isn't reducible to matter, right? That you can't get the semantics from the physical out there in the world. And so the way, it's kind of like, I can't think of like a good analogy, maybe like protons and neutrons and electrons or something. It's kind of like just the way the chemistry behaves. And when I think what goes on when you compare the genetic sequence to the way a book is written, is that you're talking about how a book has meaning to it to be interpreted, whereas the genetic sequence doesn't have meaning to be interpreted. It is like a causally determined physical process in the world. So I think there's a difference there where that analogy kind of breaks down a little bit. On the second point, I agree with you that I look at the world and wonder about it as well. But what I also recognize is that my inability to know everything about it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a god, or what my intuition is. Like, again, I'd say it makes sense on naturalism that I would feel that way looking at things, I think.
Yeah, see, I don't think naturalism makes sense, because I feel like naturalism can't explain the reason why I still don't see. Here's what it is. Have you read Plato's book, Republic?
I'm aware of its content. I've read like book 7's His Proof for God. But I'm just planning on studying it in the next month or so.
It's a really good book. What Plato does, and I think this is kind of ingenious, is he said, what would life be like if people, instead of revering things like humility and selflessness, what would the world be like if people revered things like selfishness and, survival of the fittest? What is this survival of the selfless and helping the outgroups? Evolution can't explain the fact that
Hold on a second though, SJ, because it's not fittest doesn't mean it doesn't
most
mean
adaptable.
The Aryans. Yeah, well, it mean not even the most adaptable, but the best suited to the environment. So if the environment is selecting for compassion, right? So if you think of what are the current selection pressures on the human species, right? As we look at how we're getting by with coronavirus and stuff, and we could say, well, actually, it's things like compassion that are being selected for by our current environment, and it's not. Does that make sense? Like, it's not.
Well, the reason why I brought up Plato's book is because he looked at this idea of selfishness, and I just want to go back to what my point is here. Sure. Evolution gives us a great explanation for why people help their in-groups and why people help their family and their kin and that sort of thing. And it's all written out. Evolution can help to explain the social evolution, if I would call it that, or our social development. It helps us to explain why in China they've got such huge levels of in-group collectivism, because people are very much into themselves. That's why in China, unless you network or do what they call guanxi, it's very unlikely that you're going to do very well business-wise there, because you have to align yourself with the Chinese because they have a suspicion of outgroups. But But evolution doesn't give us a good explanation for why Shalom Schwartz, for example, found that the number 2 value that everyone has that around the entire world is universalism, which is this idea that we should help the out groups, and we should help people that we might not even know, send money down to poorer countries or do something like that. Evolution doesn't give us a good explanation for why that's a part of the human experience. And so I would say, I'd make an argument that's evidence that God is, someone's tinkering at the wheel here. So.
Yeah, I'm certain that there are people in anthropology who have put forward. The common criticism of anthropology, though, is that it is, to make a joke, as ad hoc as apologetics can be. People kind of have assumed their conclusion and are making just so stories to explain why we find things to be the way they are through positing evolution as the mechanism. But I'd say when we have good reason to do so, because just by induction, that's what the kind of scientific method is. So I'm sure. I think V linked something in the chat that there's people putting explanations out there about why that is the case. I'm sure it's not inexplicable.
Mm-hmm. I would just say, I just noticed, John Lloyd and G-Man and Brian Stevens. I want to say hi to you guys, Tim and Flash Gordon, Tony Designs. Hi, everybody in the chat. I haven't had a chance to, we haven't been following the chat as closely as I probably need to be, but I just want to say hi to everybody. If you want to, want to ask Nathan something or want to talk to me on something, just tag me tag me so I see the chat come up. So, but yeah, no, yeah.
Sorry, you go.
No, I think, I would just say, see, Nathan, I think, just looking at our human experience, I think you and I both agree that there's something that's greater than us. There's a reason why we seek something greater than us. And then the question comes to, okay, now what is this something? What are the characteristics of this power? And whether it's in the Christian faith or whether it's a different faith, we both want to know the truth. And that's another interesting thing is why do humans seek the truth? And I know you could probably make an evolutionary argument for that based on people who lied a lot might have been excluded from their communities and that sort of thing over time. But it's just interesting that the human value on things such as life, liberty, justice, truth, these incredible values that we have. Trust is a really big one too. So I just feel like we should give credit where credit's due as far as the creator. So
I think though where we differ on that is, where I say, I can see how theism makes sense, or like a Platonic realm of forms or something, but I can also see how naturalism makes sense of those things. Like it could be the case that what a product of natural selection is that I whatever my highest ideals are, which have been selected for, because I'm a conscious being, I mythologize that and I project it as a deity, something like Freud's kind of thing. And I entertain both those positions because I don't think either of them are falsifiable. I don't think either. And that's where we fundamentally don't know, because you can't. I suppose you could attempt to show that a particular conception of God is logically impossible, but I don't think anyone successfully does that. And I suppose you could do the same with something like the evolutionary hypothesis, though it's become like a popular trope as well, because there's evolution as actual anthropologists and biologists talk about it and mean it, and there's this popular kind of idea of what evolution is and means, and that's a lot less falsifiable. And
yeah,
I think you go.
People use evolution too much to try to use it as an explanation for so many things. I think that started because of people like Richard Dawkins. But I want to say real quick before I forget these questions. Thinbox Dictator asked me if I have been into science, and then G-Man is saying, ask Nathan to name 5 other possibilities besides evolution. So we'll get to that in just a second. But as far as the science, I just want to mention, science really has never been my interest. I have to be honest. I'm not really into it. When I chose my field of business, I chose it because I consider myself a practical person. And I also looked into the salaries of different types of jobs, and I felt like business is where it's at. And so actually in the natural sciences, even in the natural sciences, the professors make about half what the business professors make. Is unbelievable as that sounds, it's actually the truth. So that was one reason I chose a major based on financial reasons. I wanted to support my family. But as far as evolution, so do you think that they might have overextended themselves a little bit by using evolution always as an explanation for everything? They're trying to say that, oh, here we have empathy, therefore, it's kind of like what they call the just so argument that Seigart says. He says,
sorry, you go.
Have you heard that argument?
Yeah, and I think in some cases that for some atheists that is true, but definitely not for all. Yeah, I think there are occasions where people, but this is a sword that cuts both ways, because it cuts the Christians with their explanation of God as well, where they're not willing to abandon that as the hypothesis over like a natural thing, because they think it takes away. And but there are cases where people do this for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. And you said something earlier in the conversation that I did want to ask you about too. You talked about Genesis, and I can tell from even the people who are in the chat here, I know where some people stand on Genesis. And so I don't want to, I had to preface what I'm saying. I don't have the solid stance on Genesis. You might've seen that I posted William Lane Craig's, what he thinks yesterday on Twitter. Did you see that?
I've watched his defenders classes on it, so I know what he thinks.
Yeah, like William Lane. So we've got here's what's going on in these camps, and you also mentioned young Earth creationists. So I'm gonna mention that too. I'm not a young Earth creationist, but here's the different things with Genesis. So some people think that there's a literal Adam and Eve, and that the two first humans on the planet essentially, and that they lived 900 years each or something like that, and they had a bunch of babies. I mean, Hugh Ross is in that camp. He thinks there's a literal Adam and Eve. Then some people, and so is William Lane Craig. But then William Lane Craig and Hugh Ross go on different paths. So Hugh Ross basically figured out that if they were around for 900 years, then their offspring are mating with offspring and all these other, people could have been there at the same time. There are other people like Heiser apparently who think that maybe they were the first humans, but maybe God made other humans right around the same time and had all of them sort of together. And that's why we have them getting married to people who are suddenly popping into the scene. So we have people with that camp. Then there's the 6,000 year camp, and people say, well, because Matthew and Luke gave genealogies, one of them gave a genealogy going all the way back to Adam, that this must mean that we're figuring out with lifetimes, this must go back 6,000 years. And then there are other people who think like William Lane Craig. He actually thinks that Adam and Eve were Neanderthals possibly, and predating us by 750,000 years. So, I mean, there's all these different theories, and I really don't know. And then William Lane Craig also, as he's saying that, he thinks that the whole Genesis 1-11 is sort of in the myth genre. And that's like Joel. I had a guy on my channel once, Joel, what's his name? Edmund Anderson. He's written a lot. He's a liberal Christian. And he also thinks Genesis 1-11 is a sort of metaphor. And so there's all these different camps, and it's super interesting. And I guess what, with the crowd, I haven't taken a position because I'm not even sure that any of them you can really know any of those positions. I will say I'm not a young Earth creationist. That's the one thing I will say, but I haven't taken the position on Adam and Eve, because I think that there's competing theories, and I find them all fascinating. And you could go down any path, but I'm not going to dig my stake in the ground and say that's what I'm taking, because I figure I'll just wait one day and ask Jesus. So, what do you think? Do you think of it more of as a myth in Genesis 1-11, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my view is that geology, biology, physics, and textual criticism of the Bible would rule out a young Earth view. I think that the young Earth view is actually a misreading of of what Genesis is actually saying, and it could be true incidentally, but it's definitely not what Genesis is saying. Like, it could be true at the same time still, but Genesis isn't concerned with material creation in my view. And I don't think, and G-Man said there, Nathan thinks the whole Bible is a myth. Nathan doesn't think the whole Bible is a myth, but Nathan thinks it's more complicated than it's far much more complicated than the Bible being a rule book. So I don't want to go off too far on that, but if I go to like in Proverbs, say, and we were taking the Bible as a rule book, right? And I've gone to the wrong bit there. So if we're taking the Bible as a rule book, and it says, watch me not find the right place now. So basically, there's this idea that in Proverbs, there's loads of things side by side that would seem to be contradictions if our attitude is that it's a rule book. So Proverbs 26, 4-5, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So for the presuppositionists, right, and the, you know, everything is A or not A, everything, the people who are saying it's a rule book that tells us how to behave. Well, the Bible there is saying, answer not a fool according to his folly, answer a fool according to his folly. Which one do you do, right? It's more complicated than that, and there's so many examples of that. Like when
Yeah, no, you're
about,
right. You're
sorry,
right. No, I agree with you. I think that the Bible does do that. It gives us, I mean, sometimes some of the things that are said in the Bible seem like what you say, well, Jesus said this here, and then Jesus said that there. And why did Jesus allow, like, why did Moses allow people to get divorced? And so there's things that they thought were contradictory. And I agree with you. So I would say Proverbs is truly wise stuff.
But then if we come to Genesis, and I think there's a difficulty here. First, we've got to understand and appreciate ancient Near Eastern cultures. Secondly, we've got to understand our translations into the English, or what's the, you know, it's controversial how you translate certain things. So the Christian tradition has had this idea of creation ex nihilo from Genesis. Now you'd get creation ex nihilo from other places in the Bible, but from Genesis itself was used as a proof text, and so conservative translations like the NIV or the ESV are going to be influenced by that. Now the Jews in the Hebrew, Michael Heiser agrees with this, the NRSV translators agree with this, is that rather than in the beginning, it's more like when the beginning happened, which was in chapter 1. And so it's like, when the beginning happened, God created, and created again, it's not created as in like the English word created, which means, you know, like we think of physical, like something being made, like a house or whatever. Whereas the word bara is more about like a function. So it's like when God bara the heaven and the earth was tohu and bohu, without form and void. It's not got a function. It's not articulated, might be a way of thinking about it. And darkness was over the face of deep. So there's no definite article. There's no the deep. It's just like the deep is like this thing. And the ruah of God, which is like the wind of God, not the Holy Spirit like Christians necessarily would inject in there, was hovering over the face of the waters. And then we've got this whole creation account up to Genesis 2:4, which is we've got actually two creation accounts in Genesis. So Genesis 2:4 onwards is a separate creation account, and one of them is like this kind of God's eye view almost, and then the other one is like this. It's like more down in. It becomes like a story about people and so forth. And then yeah, within that, I would say I'd agree with like John Walton's interpretation that what this is doing is it's God articulating like a proper function to things as you go through the first chapter of Genesis, and then as you come into the second chapter, here's a problem with interpreting it literally. You've got two different creation accounts of man. If you've got two different creation accounts of man, how is God creating man? There's all sorts of issues with a literal reading of the text here, and there's all sorts of reading issues in having to like, if you read the Bible that way, then surely you believe that Rahab the sea monster exists, right? That there are other gods, because the Old Testament certainly affirms that, because it's drawing on, you know, it's written by a people in an ancient Near Eastern culture. Sorry, you want to come in?
No, I do want to. I have to comment on the other gods. It's interesting because God in the very beginning, he refers to himself as Elohim, so that's a plural. And another thing is he says, let us bring forward the earth and that kind of thing. There's a divine council, and sometimes they're referred to as sons of gods or sons of God, I should say. And so we have this. It was mentioned. Actually, Michael Heiser, like you mentioned a divine council. So we do have that kind of thing of the sons of gods and those possibly being angels, according to people like Heiser.
That isn't like one of my proof texts for that. So like in Isaiah 51:9, right? Jerusalem, and I'd say this is written after the exilic period, and Jerusalem's being allegorized as the wife of Yahweh, and Yahweh's the husband. And so I'd say this is written after the destruction of the temple. It's being written to assert this monotheism, and basically the wife is saying, awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord, awake as in days of old, the generations of long ago. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces, who pierced the dragon? Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep? And this is an ancient Near Eastern myth. This isn't the creation account of Genesis. This is the author of this part of Isaiah, as you know, affirming what would have been culturally relevant at the time. These kind of creation myths where a battle of the gods with a lowercase g causes the created order of the world. And the author of Genesis is also clearly aware of this. There's enough different, and I don't think this undermines Christianity at all, but there's enough difference between Yahweh and the ancient Near Eastern cultures, but it's like a twist on what people would have already known, asserting asserting that there's a difference with this new God that's coming out of these myths.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say, because I want to address a couple of things you said. So the other thing that Heiser talks about is when God refers to the Elohim, it could be him, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. Then later he mentions the creation of the angels. So the sons of God, those come in later on with this idea of the angels. And just the word gods, sometimes if gods is used in the Old Testament, a lot of times that's just a reference to like divine spirits. You could replace that word for spirits. And so that's just something to speak to that. But the other thing that you mentioned that I do want to get to is the 24-hour 7-day creation.
Oh, I didn't mention that. I don't think that's what it's saying at all.
No, I know you don't think that. This is what I want to say, just
okay,
so people know. No, I just want to say, so here's what happens. Each of the first 6 days, we have a beginning of the day and an ending of the day. We have the day and then a night. And then on the 7th day, when God rested, we don't have the ending of the day. We don't see the night. And so an interpretation could be that these are referring to eras or epochs. And they could be, different times over the thousands of years that the Earth has been on this planet. The Earth has been here. But the fact that we don't have an end day and there's a rest, what Hugh Ross has taken with that, which is pretty interesting, is Hugh Ross basically says that one of the reasons why we don't see as many this evidence of modern day evolution and changing of species and that sort of thing is because God is in this resting period, and maybe his most active time was back in the Cambrian explosion. And so G-Man wants to come in here, it looks like I'm seeing, but he wants me to get aggressive.
I mean, if I'm happy to talk to G-Man if he actually wants to engage with biblical scholarship. But I think, like I've seen him with Inspiring Philosophy, right, talking about the symbolism used, the symbolism of numbers in ancient Near Eastern cultures, especially Israel. And he's like, the King James, my Bible says this in English, and he doesn't even speak Hebrew, isn't familiar with the text, and it's very frustrating because it's like, right, here's why it's frustrating. You just can't break through to someone like that. You can't get them to, and that is the reason why I'm not a Christian in his sense.
Yeah, well, G-Man, I like G-Man a lot, and Veckel, I love chatting with those two guys. And in fact, tomorrow I'm going to be on G-Man's channel, unless, in case anybody wants to know that. But you guys last time didn't get along too well when you were on the same channel, so it might be better not to come in here. But the thing is people, when you go and look at the evidence on Genesis, just keep an open mind, just read it and try not to say to yourselves, if you can't understand exactly which way to interpret this, that means that the whole thing's not true, because that's definitely not what that's saying. It's really saying what Nathan has touched on here that I think is pretty important, is this idea of is that Vera right behind you?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, what's she doing? Is she want to get in here too? Maybe she should come sit.
She's just on her computer.
Oh, okay. So she's in the chat because I've seen her.
She's listening in, yeah.
So, so it might be, G-Man, it might not be a good idea to get everybody in here right now. So I think, but I wanted to say I want to go back to what you mentioned on Jesus's resurrection, because you and I have had a talk about this idea with Jesus's resurrection, and I think, hey, Vera, oh, so she got on. That's cool. So where'd she go? Okay, so does she have a black shirt too?
No, she's in gray.
This is a black shirt with the stripes. That would be hilarious. So, so anyway, so I'm going to go back to what we were saying. So in this idea with Jesus's resurrection, I know you've considered like the early Christian disciples, and you've considered their experiences and what they were saying and that kind of thing. So what do you not find compelling about that story? Because to me, I think when we put what they call like the minimal facts together for this, and we say, well, even extra biblically, we know from people like Josephus that, and others, we have lots of extra biblical sources, but we know that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. We know that his disciples said after 3 days that they saw him over a period of 40 days. They said that they saw him in groups in this period. So first they said Peter saw him, then the 12, then 500, then James, then Paul. So all of these people are saying that. And then they spent the next bunch of decades not recanting and basically being crucified and jailed and that sort of thing. And so I feel like that, to me, just putting all that together and saying, what's the best explanation? I feel like the best explanation is what they said it was, which was Jesus resurrected. So I wonder I'm wondering what is holding you back from seeing that answer? Because I feel like that's pretty strong.
So I think basically it's induction and probability. So I don't know of anyone ever getting raised from the dead. Obviously you'd say, well, Jesus is the example, but I mean, it's not something that I think medically is recognized by anyone as something that happens. It's not something I've got any experience of happening in the world. It's just not something that happens. And I think for me, what's more likely is that these people with a knowledge, I just think that I do think Jesus existed, and I'd agree on the vast majority of those minimal facts and so forth. But what I would say is that a lot of the things, so like the chronologies, say, of the Gospels and things like that, we know that there are literary devices being used. We know that there's theological messages being put across. And I think that what's going on there is we see like a lot of this mimesis type thing where they're bringing through their knowledge of the Old Testament, where they're using like even things from the seasons and so forth that become part of a theological message. And I think that some of the more, what would you say, the more miraculous things are probably things that the authors put in rather than that happened in reality, or things that, and some of them the authors were probably convinced of, but I just think that they were more likely than not wrong about them. But I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you on a lot of the history there, but I'm not convinced that, say, the miracles happened or the resurrection.
So you would be convinced that there's embarrassing testimonies throughout the Gospels?
I mean, sort of, but like the thing is that
motivate them to make up miracles and to say this stuff if they didn't actually experience them, because they could be called out by their peers for being liars. So
Joseph, like on the embarrassing points thing, so one of them that's often quoted is like the women's testimony, right? And Josephus writes about, the fall of Masada in the Jewish revolt. It's like this hilltop fortress. The Romans came and basically there was this huge battle. They built a big ramp up and destroyed it. And I think Josephus writes that basically what they did was they made up female testimonies about certain events that happened, because they knew that women's testimonies were less like, so people, it was like a double agent kind of thing where they'd where people would think that these reports were more true because they'd be embarrassing. And so we know historically that this is a contemporary thing people did. Like, we've got warrant to believe that when people are trying to convince others of things, they'll use devices like that. Now, the miracles and stuff, again, what would motivate them? It's a really good question. Probably that they, in some sense, were either convinced of them, and it doesn't quite mean what a literal reading might say. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure what.
Yeah. So I mean, you have a lot of people saying the same thing, and then you even have the disciples going about themselves after Jesus resurrected. You have people like Peter and Paul who are able to heal people as well, and so we have, their peers, when they're writing this stuff, could have easily called them out and said, "You guys are liars. Nobody was healed. No person was blind and suddenly can see, or no person was deaf and suddenly can hear." You even have Jesus healing people who died, like a little girl who died at one point, and then Jesus brought her back to life. And so you've got, you don't have people like in ancient times basically calling them out and saying, "You guys are full of it." Instead, actually, you've got contemporaries, though. Sorry. Well, you do have people outside of the Bible in the first few decades afterwards, basically saying that Jesus was a miracle worker. Jesus worked wonders. They called him a wonder worker,
a magician.
Yeah. Somebody called him a magician. They've called him Yeah. So you've got, you do have that kind of thing. So he was doing something, obviously that at least was meriting that. And so, but then again, Nathan, do you ever look at some of the prophecies from the Old Testament and think about how they relate to the New Testament?
Yeah. And I actually think that a lot of that is good evidence that the authors were copying from the Old Testament. And I think some of the prophecies, so like in that section of Isaiah, where it's like, it talks about Cyrus becoming the king, right? But I'd actually date that section of the Old Testament to later than when it was. So I think with the tool, like with textual criticism and the dating of things, and also that the New Testament authors were deeply familiar with the Old Testament, that I think they were reading into the things, like what would a Messiah be like? And what, maybe you're familiar, one of the examples for that would be that the Septuagint translation of the birth of the servant, right, it uses a virgin, which is a bad translation from the Hebrew, which would be like young woman. And so people would say that the whole doctrine of Mary being a virgin is basically these people who couldn't read Hebrew but had wide access to the Septuagint, reading that backwards and doing this mimesis thing where they're writing, they're filling in the gaps of what they thought happened based off of the Old Testament.
Okay.
Maybe sincerely. Yeah. Do you want to?
No, I wanted to point out a couple of things. One thing is you're making an assumption, like Luke, for example, was not familiar with the Old Testament necessarily because Luke wasn't a Jew. But so we do have people who are non-Jewish also supporting this.
But he reads Greek in the Septuagint, right?
So, well, let me go back to also, just in case people in the chat need to know this, if you guys are looking into the Old Testament and you're wondering about any of the prophecies that I'm mentioning, a book like Daniel 9 says that there'll be 77s left 77s less 7 years, so 483 years essentially from the decree, when the decree goes out to rebuild Jerusalem, and that went out in 444 BC. And that leads us to, if we use 360-day Jewish years and exclude the year 0, it leads us to the year 33 when Jesus was crucified. And basically on Nisan 10 is when the Passover lamb was presented. That's when Jesus basically was recognized in Palm Sunday. We recognize Palm Sunday, but it actually occurred on Monday. So Nisan 10, Jesus presented himself essentially as the Passover lamb, and that's the day that they selected the lambs. And then Nisan 14, Jesus was crucified, and that was the day that they slain the lambs. And so we have a lot of parallels with the book of Exodus, Daniel 9, and then you've got Isaiah 53, Psalm 22, and Zechariah 12:10 that basically said he was going to be pierced for our transgressions. And just a word for pierce, it's interesting because they hadn't even invented the crucifixion yet when those 3 passages were mentioned. So if you guys want to know the truth, and just consider the fact that the disciples had no material reasons to make up any lies and to collude on this because they were being jailed and beaten and stoned and imprisoned, just be honest with the information, everybody, and just open your eyes to that, because it is the truth. And so
I'd say lots of that prophecy, especially the messianic stuff, is kind of, like people who study the Old Testament academically would possibly disagree. So like, again, the NRSV would translate Psalm, is it 22, 14 or 16? They translate that messianic prophecy very differently. So the NRSV says something completely different to the NIV, and it doesn't sound like Jesus at all.
no, it actually,
Isaiah,
in the other translation, it's either the word is bore through the hands or the word is pierced. And so those really aren't different.
It's in the NRSV, it's like my hands were stretched out like lions or something.
Yeah, it refers to it's the same idea with boring through the hands, if those. But the other thing, Nathan, that just to consider is what they were expecting back then. Because if you look at Sanhedrin, now I'm talking about a Jewish text. So if you guys go to Sanhedrin 97 A and B and 98 A and B, please go look at those. This is a Jewish textbook. And basically what it was in these passages, they were expecting Jesus to come about at this point. I mean, they had just completed the second set of 2,000 years. And they said, now is the time of the Messiah. So one of the reasons why we saw all these people in the ancient times claiming to be the Messiah was because they were expecting the Messiah at that time. And so then the Sanhedrin basically said, well, maybe we were wrong and maybe the Messiah didn't come or something like that, because they were trying to justify the fact that they weren't going to recognize Jesus. But also, interestingly, in those Sanhedrin passages, they expected two types of Messiah. They expected either one, like a Daniel 7 coming in the clouds of glory, or they expected one who was going to be like Isaiah 53, who was going to be a suffering servant. And so Jesus came as a suffering servant at that point, and then later he's going to come as coming in the clouds of heaven, basically. So we're seeing a first and a second coming. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff if you guys do some work and dig in this.
So on the Isaiah stuff as well, I'd say that Isaiah 49 identifies the servant as Israel. And I think the servant is Israel, and often in prophetic rhetoric, we see like the righteous part of Israel kind of divided from the other part that's gone astray. It's not a metaphysical treatise. It's it's poetry. So you see like the plural and singular being used, and I do think that the servant is more likely identified with Israel, the nation.
Okay, so here's why that's not true. It's Jewish people really look at this too, and some of them do say Israel. Jesus is referred to as Israel as well. So the suffering servant is Israel. But Israel as a nation or as a people, it doesn't make sense, because in the book of Isaiah in 53, it specifically says that he was without sins, essentially. And so in Israel, of course, is a sinful nation and has, so that doesn't relate to that. He was pierced for our transgressions. Why would Israel be pierced for things that somebody else did? And so this whole idea of Israel being, and then also he was nothing to look at, no beauty in him. That's another thing that's different. Israel has a lot of beauty in it. And so in Israel, people have a lot of beautiful people. So this speaks to Jesus as the suffering servant.
So if Paul used these same verses in Isaiah to talk about Christians who suffer as a servant of Christ, would you say he was wrong to do that then in his inspired part of the Bible? When
he says that we suffer too? But yeah, we all bear our own crosses, so that sort of thing.
So let's say, because let's say if it's about Jesus and not like a collective or anything else, then if Paul wrote using these parts as like a kind of look back to identify Christians with those who suffer as servants as Jesus, then he'd be wrong, right, to do that.
Well, the difference is that all Christians have sinned and everybody else has sinned, Romans 3:23. So that's the difference between all Christians, anyone who worships Jesus. He's the only one who was like the Passover lamb was supposed to be, blemish free, and a firstborn, male firstborn. So all this stuff is really consistent with the book of Exodus as far as symbolism. It's actually really interesting stuff.
But I think we see that in Isaiah as well, where the author is conceptualizing like a new Exodus, right? Like in 52:11, depart, go out from there, touch no unclean thing, go out in the midst of her, for you shall. And it talks about like this caravan like the verses that are in Handel's Messiah, or every valley shall be exalted kind of thing, that there's going to be like this highway to Jerusalem as the people go along it in this new exodus, forget the things of old. And I think that we know that this is what the authors do when things change, is that they hark back to things in the past and put them together, which is what I think, when I think it's Luke, when he talks about like after the transfiguration, like a new exodus or whatever. I just say that that's what's going on there, is that he's familiar with these stories about Moses and stuff, and so he's trying to make sense of what's happened to him with Jesus, and that's how it kind of turns out.
Okay, so I'm just gonna, I just want to see just so you guys can read this and realize why the Jews for Jesus actually have been converting people big time to Christianity when they read this passage. So they have this, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root of dry ground. He had no beauty, okay, that can't be Israel, or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man, not Israel, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He was despised. Surely he took up our pain. And then it goes down. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds, we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. And so you also see he's oppressed and afflicted. He did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter. This is a complete relation to Jesus. And so to me, it's crystal clear that that's Jesus. And you can say, the only way I think people can get away from that is to ignore what the passage actually says.
So like in Isaiah 47, right, when it's talking about Babylon, verse 2, take the millstone and ground flour, put off your veil, strip off your robe, uncover your legs, pass through the rivers. Your nakedness shall be uncovered and your disgrace shall be seen. Does Babylon do that? Is there a person called Babylon who does that?
Oh, I get Sentinel apologists. It's sometimes they do refer to countries, but the thing was, we know that Israel has sinned, and so Sentinel apologetics. Thank you for the super chat. He says, damage done by Pinecreek. What damage? Well, Nathan had turned into an agnostic after he got off with Pinecreek, but now he's kind of a cultural Christian, I think you'd probably call him, right, Nathan?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and even in the Sanhedrin, if you look at 97 and 98, which are Jewish documents, that's one of the reasons why they said there were two different types of Messiah, because they knew that the suffering servant was one of those types. So you guys, please go look at the Sanhedrin and what they themselves decided about that passage initially, and then they changed their minds later. But the Sanhedrin documents what they initially decided.
I would just say that in the scholarly literature, it's divided over the identity of the servant. It's not like, I don't just mean divided between whether it's Israel or an individual. I mean, like, people just aren't sure exactly what it means.
So, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. So people definitely are divided. I can say that, you've got somebody like that rabbi, what's his name? Shlomo or something like that. So yeah, you definitely have some people.
Shmuley, I think.
What's that guy's name? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Rabbi Shmuley, is it?
Shmuley? Yeah, it's somebody. There's this guy, Tobiah. No, it's Tobiah.
Oh, Tobiah Singer.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so I mean, you definitely have some Jewish people who will argue for your, the position that it's Israel. To me, it just actually that's one of the reasons I came to Christianity was I was sitting next to a pastor on a plane who made me read or told me to read Mere Christianity and Isaiah 53. And when I read Isaiah 53, I'm like, how do the Jewish people not? Is this really in their book? And so I looked that up, and it was, and I was like, oh my gosh. Hey, do you guys have any questions for Nathan or for me if you want to ask? We've got a lot of great people here in the chat.
G-Man was saying that I know I'm lying and stuff like that. I don't think I'm lying. Like, I'm genuinely, and I was talking to another Christian who's probably not a Christian by G-Man standards, Josh Rasmussen, the other day, and he recommends that we all go with what the lights of our reason tell us. And if it appears to us that Christianity isn't true, and that's where our honest inquiry leads us, that's where we should go. He says.
I totally agree. And actually, Jesus tells us to do that. And all throughout the Bible, it basically says you need to search for the truth, look for evidence, test everything. That's all really clear. But it also makes clear this other passage. There's a part where Jesus basically tells his disciples when they're in the boat and they'd gone fishing all day and they're just exhausted and they figured there were no fish out there. And Jesus said, just, it's kind of like, have just a little faith, throw your net in the water And so they did, they threw the net and pulled up 153 fish. And so, so you kind of need to have a schlemiel. What's a schlemiel? Do you know what a schlemiel is?
I have no idea.
Yes. Brent Killar says, don't be a schlemiel. I have to look that up. It must be, it sounds like a Jewish term.
Yeah.
I think, didn't Laverne and Shirley say schlemiel, schlemazel, something like that?
No idea.
Okay, Apologetic Showdown has something. What do you think is the strongest argument against Christianity? Sorry if you answered this. What do I think is the strongest argument? If anyone could prove that Jesus didn't resurrect, that would falsify Christianity. So it is falsifiable. So,
Is that something that can be proved?
well, that's the thing. You'd have to somehow, I mean, I think the evidence proves it. It actually is evidenced. And I also think, I mean, I'll be honest with you guys, and I've mentioned this lots of times before. I didn't come to Christianity because of reading the Bible or reading Josh McDowell or reading I mean, I kind of C.S. Lewis definitely helped, but I came to Christianity because I had some spiritual experiences, and so that's the honest truth. And so I feel like a lot of times people might be resistant, and you might do all the reading that I've done, just like you've read that whole Josh McDowell book, and
Not the whole thing, but I've read most of it.
Yeah, you read most of it. So you read, I mean, that's a big book. So where is that book? I have the book around here. So, oh yeah, I've got the book right here. But I mean, that's the thing is I think a lot of times the Holy Spirit opens your eyes when you're ready. And if that's not till you're 40, in your early 40s like me, then that's the case. And so I would say that passages like Isaiah 53 is about Zerubbabel. Jewish prophecy is under signs and typologies, and as Jesus himself affirmed, Isaiah 53 has a fuller application to Jesus ultimately. Interesting. Huh? That's Sentinel Apologetics. Oh, Jesse Camping, can you ask, if you have time, is Nathan scared to be wrong in choosing Christianity? Wait, let me ask the second question too. And Brian
Yeah,
Stevens, sure. Was there ever a time in your life when you would say to people, I'm not a Christian? No, there was never that time.
Yeah,
But
and sorry, you go.
Would you be scared? So like going back to Jesse Camping.
No, because I'd say like something like Pascal's wager would apply. And so I think it's more scary to say, I don't think this is true if you honestly don't. Okay,
so you would, and then Korag Nightwolf says, could there be a God and no heaven or hell? It's possible, but I mean, I kind of go with the idea that there is something greater than ourselves out there. And I like C.S. Lewis's desire argument, where he said, if we desire, if we feel like there's a desire coming from another world and we desire something higher purpose, then we must be made for another world. I kind of like that. Was there ever a time in your life when you would say to people, I'm not a Christian? No, I never actually said I'm not a Christian. I just didn't really say anything. I was just sort of waffling about reading stuff. If Doug turned, something about a Muslim. Wait, let me just see what that one was. I'm trying to catch these questions and they're moving kind of fast. Okay, Master Blast or Blaster Master says, if Doug turned a Muslim into a cultural Muslim, would you consider that damaging? Since you're a cultural, I don't think Doug turned you into a cultural Christian. Would you say?
I'd say he instigated a lot of my doubts, and I'm actually very grateful that he did, because I think I would have ended up with an unpleasant form of Christianity and a life that was mostly based around like social pressure and lies rather than like an authentic version of religion.
Yeah, you want an authentic. I completely agree. Sentinel Apologetics says, SJ, for example, the 70 weeks in Daniel 9 perfectly fits the near short-term context of Nehemiah soon after the exile ended, but again, a fuller application for Jesus. So it's interesting too. Yeah, Sentinel actually has some really interesting insights, and he actually did a lot of investigation on the book of Daniel. And so I like having him on.
I'd say like I really do agree with him. And the reason that I'm not saying the fuller application to Jesus bit is because I want to push back against the simplistic reading of the Bible, which is just that it clearly says that it's about Jesus. Because I think that so much of the nuance and the context that's actually there in the Bible is just washed over by how the NIV has been written.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's what I like about the Bible. It can be very deep or very simple, depending on sort of what you want, how willing you are to dig in. So was there a time in your life when you considered yourself not a Christian? So about 20 years I was away from the church. I kind of waffled in and out of it every so often, but I really wasn't I was more like a cultural Christian, I guess you could say, but I was also looking into Buddhism and some of the Eastern faiths. And then favorite apologist and favorite atheist. So we can both answer that. So my favorite apologist of all times is C.S. Lewis, because that's when my eyes were opened. And my favorite atheist, it's my favorite atheist. That's a tough one. Oh, I probably like Adam Friended. I think I like Adam Friended. He's pretty good. You're not an atheist, so I would name Nathan if Nathan were an atheist. So who's your favorite apologist and favorite atheist?
My favorite apologist is probably William Lane Craig. I just really appreciate his work ethic in philosophy and everything that he's done. Even though, I disagree with a lot of his views, even on like Genesis and stuff within that, but I still appreciate his, like, the amount of work he's done and his thoughts about things. Then favorite atheist.
You've got one sitting next to you.
Yeah, I mean, probably like someone, I quite like Stephen Law. I like Alex Malpass quite a lot. I enjoy the way he goes about discussions and things. So someone like that. Yeah, I'll go with Alex Malpass.
Okay. Yeah, besides the company in your room, right?
Yeah.
I know I wasn't necessarily a Buddhist. I was reading a lot of their stuff and I found it interesting, but I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist during that time. I was just sort of reading all Celestine prophecy, and I was reading just that kind of stuff. Lots of James Dyer or Wayne Dyer, he's one of those sort of thinks that every religion has some validity. And so that's basically how I was.
So what you're saying, SJ, is that Jesus isn't your favorite apologist?
Oh, that's true. Well, Jesus isn't really, he's not out there defending the faith. I mean, he's out there inspiring the faith, but he's not, we're kind of given that charge. So I'm not an atheist. Oh, Vera Cruz she's not an atheist.
Yeah, no, she's a Muslim.
Is she a Muslim?
No, I was just seeing how she'd react. No, I think agnostic would be. I don't know if she'd go with the label. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Brian Stevens says, if you weren't a boast, you were a Christian who was not yeah, I was like probably what Nathan is right now. I was cultural Christian. So I appreciated the Christian stuff, but I thought it was kind of boring at the time. I mean, I thought it was just kind of the fallback, and I was wrong. I mean, once I started looking into it, I can't get enough information about it now. I mean, I like what Sentinel Apologetics does, the way he digs into stuff and finds these different meanings. I think that's really exciting stuff. And so we have any more? You weren't a Buddhist, you were a Christian who was not active in the Christian. Yeah, that's what I was. I don't think I ever said I was a Buddhist, but I was interested in reading about what they were saying. So Nathan, what do you think? Should we cut it out? Should we
Yeah, can do. Yeah, that's okay. Do you agree with past SJ? This is all boring. What does that? Do you know what that means?
Do you think that, like how I used to be do you think Christianity is just sort of a, fallback?
Oh, sorry. No, I mean, personally, I think it is really, really fun to study. Like, I think theology and Bible study, all that stuff is like one of the most interesting things for me to study. I find it more exciting than like physics and maths, for example. So.
Oh, I do too. My gosh, yeah, physics. No, I'm that I don't find. I did buy, just the person who did ask me about science, though, I actually bought a biology textbook because I wanted to see exactly what they were saying about morality and how it evolved. I wanted to look at empathy and that kind of thing. So I was able to get that. So I did have my biology textbook, but I haven't read the whole biology textbook because it's really boring. So there's that. And it's so big, it's just this gigantic textbook. All right, well, anyway, so Nathan and I, you guys probably noticed we had the matching shirts on and we came to some ideas together. I think we had a pretty good discussion, would you say?
Yeah, I think it was good. Hopefully productive for everyone involved in the chat.
Yeah, and a couple people do want to talk to you in the future. It looks like G-Man was in there, and also that Darth Dawkins wants to talk to you in the future. So
I've got to be honest that I only want to talk to Darth Dawkins to like make fun of him, which is probably bad going in and not very useful. And I think like I don't know that anything useful would come from talking to G-Man, but I'm open to. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be on G-Man's channel tomorrow. So you guys, it's usually we do this at 4:00. So,
Right. Okay.
how can you not like physics?
I do like physics. It's just less than Bible study, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that you don't like it. It's just that it's not like you don't get excited about it. Let's go get 5 physics books and read them today. And that's probably fair. I definitely would say the same thing. Yeah, biology confirmed boring. People are funny. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. So you guys, thank you so much for coming in here. Please like and subscribe if you haven't yet.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Cheers.
Thank you. Oh, Nathan, wait, before we go, how can people reach you? I don't remember if I put I'm pretty sure I put your channel in here, but.
Yeah, I've got a YouTube channel that's just my name, which people should be able to just see on my Zoom box window thingy. And my Twitter, which is currently, I don't know, again, my name, Nath Ormond, but I think my name is currently Eliquid quo nihil maius cogitari posit, which is Latin for God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived. But yeah, that's just it really. I'd go with Twitter, and my details should all be on my YouTube channel as well for people that are interested.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely go over and subscribe to Nathan's channel. And yeah, apologetics and theology are different. Theology is like the study of religion and that kind of thing. And apologetics is defending the faith. And so it's kind of a funny word that sounds like apologize. So it throws people off. So I'm going to go ahead and end this. And thank you, everybody.